Hi everyone, Tracy here with the Oasis for Natural Healing. So, we're going to talk about parasites, PMS, painful periods, and poop. Yes, we are talking about all the fun things. So, parasites. It was just recently a full moon. So, who out there just kind of has felt a little bit off the last couple days? Maybe not your best, maybe a little bit more bloaty, maybe a little bit more gas, maybe just not quite their selves, especially in the digestive area. Or maybe you're having really off periods, and heaven forbid that your period comes around the full moon. Have you ever noticed that your periods or your PMS is just even worse when your period comes around the full moon? Whether it's mood swings, whether it's really bad pain and really bad cramping, whether your headaches are a little bit worse, or back pain, or your breasts are more tender around your period and when it falls around the full moon. Guess what? You got critters and you have unwanted guests living in your body. So, and it is time to send them an eviction notice. And yes, you got parasites. Yes, pretty much everybody else has parasites. And yes, it is very common. And yes, it can screw up your hormones big time. So, how do we get these little pesky little things and how do we evict them? Good question. So, parasites are pretty much all over the place. You can get them if you swim in a lake or an ocean. And by the way, I actually just was muscle testing one of my patients. She came into the office and she was complaining of ear pain. And muscle tester, I also did look in her ears, as a nurse practitioner, I did look in her ears and didn't see any fluid. There was no swollen lymph nodes, it wasn't really painful to touch. So kind of did like all the nursing things that we should be doing. And so we muscle tested her because she's got this bad ear pain. Now, conventional medicine, what would you do? Typically the doctor would say, oh, if they didn't see any fluid and the tympanic membrane doesn't look red, there's no pus coming out of your ear, they wait till things get really, really bad, right? And so that's what Western medicine does. Oh, it looks fine, and you're just like, okay, yeah, but I'm in pain, right? Who's ever done that? So you got pain. Doctor says, oh, things look great. I can't really see anything. Sorry, I hit the tray where the laptop is at. So, you go into the doctor, they can't see anything. Well, if it gets worse, this is what Western medicine does. If it gets worse, like basically if you're dying on your deathbed, then come back and see me. And they might give you a pain pill and call it a day. So patient comes in and she's got this ear pain. I look in her ears, don't see any fluid, don't see any redness. There's no bulging tympanic membrane, which is your eardrum. I palpate her ear, don't feel anything like that. Her lymph nodes are not swollen. So check her lymph nodes. And so then what do we do? Okay. So this is where I love muscle testing because then we can actually muscle test her. So I muscle tested her in the office and she is showing up for bacteria. But the biggest thing is actually parasites. And she's got parasites in her ear. And so that was kind of cool because we could actually do that. And that was actually more of a priority than the bacteria. And so I asked her, well, what were you doing? Were you doing anything fun over the weekend? And she goes, oh, yeah. She goes, I went camping. And she goes, I got water in my ear. I said, oh, were you swimming? And she goes, yes. And I said, okay, well, where were you swimming? She goes, the pool, but I was also swimming in the lake. Well, guys, guess what's in the lake? Parasites. Yes, and waterborne parasites. So, yes, they're in the lake, they're in the ocean. So, this patient just happened to come in and I could verify that, like, I didn't see an acute infection, But through muscle testing, we were able to verify that, yes, she does have a little bit of bacteria, but her biggest issue is actually parasites in her ear. And guess what makes it more active, painful? The full moon, guys. So, because parasites are more active around the full moon. Okay. And I'm sure you guys have been hearing about buzzwords about the parasites and stuff like that. And, it's becoming more and more prevalent because more and more people are waking up to the fact that, yes, people have parasites. It actually was just on the Fox News. Okay. So, yes, I'm finally glad that Western medicine is maybe, just maybe, starting to wake up to it. And maybe, us holistic practitioners don't like sound so much voodoo-ish anymore. So parasites. So, okay, so what do you do with them and how do you handle them and what does that mean for you? Okay, well, people have been dealing with parasites all over the place. This is not just the first thing, that people have heard about this. It just seems to be in the United States. A lot of my patients from Europe have been dealing with this, and a lot of doctors from Europe have been dealing with parasites for a very long time. Even neurosurgeons in Europe and Ukraine have been dealing with parasites for a long time. It just seems to be new in the US. Okay. So, how do we handle the parasites and what do you do about it? Well, there are some really good herbs that are natural anti-parasitic, such as clove, such as garlic, okay, oregano. These are really wormwood. These are really good anti-parasitic stuff that you can take on a daily basis, and have a little bit of each and every day. That can actually help your gut microbiome. All right. One of the things that I like about, doing the parasite cleanses and doing muscle testing is it gets very specific on what does the patient actually need and want instead of kind of guessing and throwing, spaghetti at the wall and hoping that it sticks. We can actually find out exactly what the patient needs. Now, if you decide that you want to do a parasite cleanse and you want to do a protocol on your own, you have to make sure that you're doing a couple things because if you're not doing it right, you're not going to feel good. And why is that? Because when you start killing off parasites, they release toxins into your body. So large parasites, believe it or not, can have microscopic ones in them. They can hold on to heavy metals and heavy chemicals. So when you kill them off, guess what? They're releasing more gunk inside your body. And so that's why a lot of people will try to do a parasite cleanse. And if the parasite cleanse is too strong for the patient's body, or they're not on enough drainage support to support the kidneys, the liver, and to excrete dead debris, or they're not on the proper binders, which binds all the toxins, you actually can feel really, 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 really sick if you're doing a parasite protocol. So, and that's some of the things that can get missed is making sure you're on a good binder. Now, some of the binders that you can have over the counter, and I don't necessarily recommend them because they're very limited onto where they bind toxins from. So, for instance, like charcoal and bentonite clay. If you have if you have toxins in the gut, yeah, it will bind to that. But what if you have toxins in the brain or toxins in other organs? Charcoal and bentonite are very limited on where they actually pull toxins from. So the binders that we use, especially practitioners who do muscle testing, are specifically hooked up with professional grade supplement companies. And they're professional, meaning that you have to have a license because they're that strong. So, and you should be monitored by a practitioner to make sure that, yeah, you're doing it right. You're getting, the help that you need. It's pulling the toxins out of where it needs to be, not just the gut, okay, which is what some of the over-the-counter stuff does. And not only that, but like some of the binders, like I use Cellcore a lot. I also use Aegis formulas, and I also use systemic formulas. They and Alimentum Labs. So these have some really good binders and some really good things on pulling out the gut, but you do have to be a practitioner. And one of the things that I like about them is when you do use it, it doesn't pull out nutrients either. Okay. If you take charcoal or bentonite clay, yes, it will pull out toxins from the gut, but you have to make sure that you don't take it around food and you don't take it around other supplements because it'll kind of pull all the nutrients from that out too. And who wants to do that? Now you're taking supplements multiple times a day, making sure that you don't have food or other supplements 2 hours before, 2 hours after, and all of that things. And that can be a little bit overwhelming for patients. So, not one of my first go tos. Plus, again, like I said, the binders actually are very limited. So, that's one of the big things about parasite cleanses and being very, very mindful on what you're taking. Now, why does it cause painful periods? And why did I mention that? Because guess what? Parasites actually can be in your uterus. Did you know that? I had a patient actually who did have parasites in her uterus. Now, we do the biggest parasite challenge in my office, and it's actually a lot of fun. Anybody who is on my business Facebook page or my Instagram page, you can actually look up pictures that patients have sent in, and we do the biggest parasite challenge in my office. So, whoever poops out the biggest worm or pass it from another orifice and sends me the picture gets a prize at the end of the month. Now, I do leave the names anonymous, but I do tell their story. Well, one of my patients, and she was getting really bad bacterial vaginosis and PMS issues, and she wasn't able to be intimate with her husband for a very, very long period of time because the bacterial vaginosis was so chronic and so it just was reoccurring. And so she was getting, I don't know if any of you guys have heard, Flagyl or metronidazole. So you can take it orally and you can take it actually vaginal suppository, and it's a medication. And typically it helps with bacterial vaginosis. Now, in this woman's case, it kept coming back. And so sometimes she would be on oral, sometimes she'd be on vaginal, sometimes she'd be on both, and it would help a little bit, but then it kept reoccurring. And so at this point, she really didn't know what to do. And like most patients that come to me, I wind up being their last resort because they've gone through all the testing. All the testing says, no, it's just this, but yet it keeps coming back. Western medicine fails them, or what the patients are trying to do on their own is not working. So then they decide to kind of come in and try the voodoo doctor. Which is what I'm known as. I'm known as the voodoo doctor or some other things. And I think it's kind of amusing. So that's basically what happened with this woman. So she comes into me and we do muscle testing on her. And she's testing for parasites in her uterus. And she's looking at me like like I have 5 heads coming out of my neck. Well, I mean, seriously, if a holistic practitioner told you that you had parasites in your uterus, you'd probably look at them a little bit goofy too. And so she goes, well, I don't know what else to do, so I guess I'm going to trust you. That was basically the response. And that's okay because she actually took the step forward. So lo and behold, now a true parasite cleanse. Now, here's the kicker. Most parasite cleanses and protocols are just for a couple weeks. You don't really get rid of, you're just barely starting on getting rid of parasites after just a couple weeks. And I'm talking with professional grade supplements. People are still pooping out and passing out parasites from all over the place. Their nose, their hoo-has, their butt, I'm talking about all over the place. And yes, I'm getting a little graphic. After about 4 to 6 months, they're still pooping out parasites. And this is with professional grade supplements, guys. Okay, so your 2-week protocol, and people go, well, it didn't do anything for me because it wasn't long enough. And I can guarantee you it wasn't strong enough either. 2 weeks is nothing, nothing. So if you've only done a parasite cleanse for a couple weeks, not long enough. So after about, now after a couple months on a parasite protocol, she did start noticing improvement. Less odor, less discharge, less irritation. And then finally, after, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 months, so she calls me up, and now she's still with me, and we see, and she's not glued to my hip anymore, but she's still a patient of mine, and we do keep in contact. She does come in for appointments and things like that. So after about 4 to 5 months, she calls me up and she goes, Tracy. And I said, yeah. And she goes, well, I was finally able to be intimate with my husband. I said, congratulations. This is a big deal because she really hasn't been able to be intimate. Can you imagine wanting to be intimate with your partner, but not being able to because you have some bacteria infection that just keeps coming back and nobody can fix it? She goes, I was finally able to be intimate with my husband. I said, congratulations. And she goes, but I went to the bathroom afterwards to kind of, you know, clean up. And I was like, yeah. And she goes, I went to go wipe. And I said, yeah. And now I kind of had a feeling of what was coming. And she goes, and there was a wad. I'm like, a wad? What do you mean a wad? And she goes, there was a whole bunch of worms that was on the toilet and it came out of my crotch. I was like, yes. And she goes, it was so disgusting. I'm like, she goes, there was like 4 or 5 worms all intertwined and they were on the toilet paper and they came from my crotch. And I was like, that's amazing. I'm like, and then of course, my first words, I was like, did you send me a picture? And she goes, no, I flushed them down the toilet. I'm like, really? You should have sent me a picture. I'm like, I wanted to see them. And she goes, that's so gross. I'm like, yeah, but this is a good thing because guess what, guys? After that, no more bacterial vaginosis. So how did that happen? Because the parasites were actually changing the pH balance in her vaginal canal, which then allowed the bad bacteria to keep growing. So the bacteria was a symptom, not the cause. The parasites were the cause. And this is why she kept going to the doctor, kept getting Flagyl, kept getting vaginal suppositories and oral medications, and it would keep coming back because they weren't treating the root cause, which was the parasites. So that's what I love about muscle testing is because we can actually figure out like, well, where are these things hiding? And then we can find out like exactly what supplements. So yes, if they're in your uterus, guess what you're going to have? More cramping, more irritability, more bloating, especially around your period, and even more so around the full moon. Guess what this is going to cause? Problems with having getting pregnant. Okay? You're going to have a lot of pain. You're going to cause irritation in your uterus. So yeah, these things are real and people don't realize that. So you can have painful periods, really bad PMS issues. They cause hormonal imbalances and people don't realize this. So what happens is you guys have PMS issues, you guys have hormonal imbalances, and then you go to the doctor and you're given birth control pills. But does anybody ever ask the question of why are my hormones whacked in the first place? Like what organ or what gland is being affected and what's irritating that gland? Is that really being addressed? And so that's where muscle testing and a good, a muscle testing technique will answer those questions. So like what's the underlying cause? And why am I having my symptoms? Okay, not just saying, oh, you have a hormonal imbalance, you have PMS, and we're going to give you birth control pills, which, by the way, can cause a lot of other pH imbalances. And this is why women on birth control can wind up with candida infections too, because it's a synthetic hormone and really throwing off other issues too and other things in your body. So we kind of want to look at the root cause. So parasites can cause that, really bad PMS issues. And it can definitely cause a lot of gut issues, such as IBS, Crohn's, and things like that. So people don't realize that parasites can cause not just constipation, but diarrhea. So most people think that like diarrhea is like, oh, I probably have a parasite. But guess what? Chronic constipation can also be a symptom of a parasitic infestation. And the kicker of it is you don't have to just have parasites in your gut, like in your intestines, to have issues. They can actually be lurking in your liver and your gallbladder, which is so important for digestion as well. So they don't have to necessarily be in your intestines to have issues. These little suckers can go migrating, and the CDC actually knows this. And they actually state that, yes, and parasites can actually form cysts and encapsulate themselves, especially larvae. So those cysts that you might have, like think ovarian cysts, kidney cysts, okay, cysts in the breast. So those can actually be parasites because they will encapsulate themselves. Now, how do we, why don't they show up in poop samples? Very good question. Because shouldn't the poop samples catch that? Not necessarily. So I actually had a patient, oh, I had a patient that was actively pooping up parasites, had gallbladder stones. And by the way, so she had gallbladder issues. I ordered an ultrasound because her symptoms, I wanted to make sure first off, she didn't have a gallstone that was causing a blockage, because that's a medical emergency. So I sent her for a stat ultrasound because she really didn't want to have her gallbladder removed. And I said, look, I'm like, if you have a gallstone that is blocking your, bile duct, I don't know if we necessarily have a choice. Okay. So if it's not, then we can try figuring out like what's going on inside the gallbladder and trying to relieve that naturally. But I want to keep a very, very close eye on you because look, I don't play around with certain things. So she said she agreed to that. So we did an ultrasound on her, and sure enough, she had gallstones, she had sludge, and she had a very inflamed gallbladder, but no blockage. So that was good. So then through muscle testing, she did have she was coming up for parasites. And so she was on a lot of gallbladder support, a lot of gallbladder drainage. Tudka was one of them. And then she was on some like a homeopathic from a company called Energetics, and I forgot what else we put her on. And then we had her on a couple parasite stuff too. And she started pooping out parasites almost immediately. And within like less than a week, her symptoms improved significantly. Within about 2 to 3 weeks, her symptoms were completely gone. She pooped out in 1 month, 1 month, and she counted. God bless her, because I don't know if I could have counted, but she must have been looking through her poop. She counted over 100 parasites in 1 month. Now, in that, she also pooped out 3 gallstones. Actually, there is a picture on my Facebook page that you can look at, and it has the 3 gallstones and the parasites. Now, she took that into the doctor. Did you know that the response from the doctor is, I don't want to look at it? She wanted to verify what kind of parasite. They wouldn't even look at it. So, and she brought it into a baggie. Now, I've had not my patient, but one of my colleagues, I guess one of his patients actually pooped out a parasite. So that patient took in the parasite in the same baggie as the poop sample, and it was a large parasite, okay? And apparently what they did was they did a scraping. So they took a Q-tip, swabbed the side of the stool sample, put that under the microscope and said, oh, you don't have parasites. Well, not to sound goofy, and I'm going to swear a little bit, but no shit, Sherlock, you took a swab. The patient has large parasites. You literally did a side swipe of the stool sample. Of course, large parasites are not going to show up underneath the microscope because you literally just did like a flyby, like in a swab. Of course, it's not going to show up underneath the microscope. You have to actually take the full parasite and put that under the microscope. If you have waterborne parasites, maybe that might show up, but even then that's hit or miss. So, and how I like to explain it is if you have large parasites and you only do think about it. If you only do like a swab with a like a Q-tip, you're not going to see that under the microscope. They're looking for small parasites while you have large parasites. That doesn't make sense. Okay. Not only that, but even if you did have small parasites, well, if you just do a swab, you're not checking the whole entire stool sample. You're checking one part of it. Okay. So a colleague of mine actually set a really good example of this. So, and she explained it this way, that, parasites and like a bag of Skittles, you could have a brand new bag of Skittles and you could have all the colors of the rainbow. Okay. And you know that you have all the colors of the rainbow because you just bought the brand new bag of Skittles, and you go to get a handful out and you notice in your handful that there's no red Skittles in your hand. Does that mean that there's no red Skittles in your hand? Or that there's no red Skittles in the bag. No, it just means that there's no red Skittles in your hand. Well, that's the parasites. So, and that's like stool samples. Okay. So, stool samples are poor at diagnosing parasitic infections. And the rule of thumb is if you have a pulse, you have a parasite. Okay. And everybody should be doing parasite cleanses at least 2 to 3 times a year, indefinitely for the rest of your life. That is prevention and maintenance. We deworm every other animal. Why are we not deworming ourselves? So, and how another analogy is you get an oil change in your car, right? You change your car oil 2 to 3 times a year. Yeah, or I mean every 3 months. Well, older cars were 3 months. I think they're up to five months now. But typically you change the oil in your car every 3 months or so. You don't wait for smoke to come out of the engine, or most of us. There's been a couple times where I had the oil light come on, so I will admit that. But most of us don't do that. We don't wait for the oil light change to come on. We just automatically have the oil change and we set up the next appointment for in 3 months or whatever, right? Well, why are we not doing that for our body? Why do most people, especially Americans, why do we wait for our symptoms to be so bad that the practitioner has to peel the patient off the floor to get them better? Why do we wait for symptoms to arise before we do something about it? Wouldn't it make more sense to actually take care of parasites, do a detox program before you develop the issue? We do that for the cars. We don't wait for the engine to go kaput. We just do oil changes. We should be doing the same thing for our bodies. Just saying. So, if that is something that intrigues you and you want to see if you have parasites or to see if you have toxins or any help with your periods or any help with your digestive systems or just overall health in general, we've helped so many people from headaches, from blood sugar issues, skin problems, from chronic pain, from high blood pressure, from diabetes, gut issues, hormonal imbalances. If you want to see if parasites are the reason why you have your symptoms, we actually have in-person and virtual appointments. And you can set up a free 10-minute discovery phone call with us, okay, to see if like how this works, if it's the right step for you, if a consultation might be what you're looking for. Schedule a free 10-minute discovery phone call. What do you have to lose? It's 10 minutes, it's free, and you can at least get an idea of what direction to go into, especially if you're tired of feeling the way you do. Call our office, 708-694-4092. We are in the office, and we'll be back in on Friday. Otherwise, you can always send me a message on Facebook or Instagram. Hopefully, you guys are having a wonderful day. And if I don't talk to you, have a good 4th of July. Bye, guys.